Hello, John. So good to have you on the podcast.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yes, hello, everybody who's tuning in. John is a wonderful therapist doing IFS, EMDR, working with PTSD, depression, anxiety, and has so much information and knowledge in this. I binged watched all of your podcast episodes. That's the Going Inside podcast. I really recommend it. It was so filled with honesty and so many beautiful insights, and I was really excited to have you on the podcast because I feel that our perception of therapy, of healing, is so aligned that I'm just so excited to dive into these topics.
Great. Thank you for having me and for checking out the show. It's been a process of kind of discovering the show as we move along and not knowing where it's going to take us, but letting everyone kind of pitch in and be part of it. And it's been really meaningful for me. I told someone yesterday I had gotten an email um, like an hour after I put out this meditation for therapists earlier this week, and I got an email saying that meditation came at like the perfect time for this therapist, and I told this person that was enough motivation for me to like keep doing this for another year or however long it might be, just knowing
Oh,
that like
that's so
it's helped a
amazing.
person or two. Yeah.
Yeah, same with my show. It's the Vitality Hub is a small show. I'm doing it for myself to
Yeah.
talk with people that inspires me and diving deeper into the topics. And I'm all the time surprised that people still somehow find their ways to the show. Those who need to hear it and find it, and it's meaningful enough for me as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So today I really want to discuss to delve deeper into IFS because I've been practicing IFS for a year now, I would say, and didn't really make a podcast specifically for IFS. I made a podcast about different kind of therapies, but I really wanted to make one with IFS specific because for me, I think IFS is the most profound technique that I found, and that's why I want to talk to you. As so many of my clients come to me who've been through so many different talk therapies, years and years, and all of them agree that once they come into IFS, they're like, some light bulb moments come and they understand that it's much more than just a therapeutic modality. So, where should we start? I don't want to go like into how it was, invented and what it is. More into just sparking the curiosity for people to get to know it by themselves. Just why is it so powerful, not how it works specifically.
Yeah. Well, part of what's so powerful about it is anyone can do it, and I think you can make the argument that IFS is one of the few therapies you can really do pretty effectively on yourself once you learn some of the basic concepts and build up some practice of getting to know your parts, unblending from your parts, accessing self energy. That I see it that there's kind of two ways into the work. One is I would call it the top down approach, which is getting to know a part, and oftentimes a part that is activated. Like, let's say you just had a difficult conversation with your partner, and they alluded to ways in which you're disappointing them. And so you have a part that's really active. And so you could start there in getting to know that part that is activated naturally. On the other hand, the bottom up approach would be cultivating this idea of self energy and starting there and seeing if I can generate enough self energy inside of me and really connect to basically what I think of as really connecting to your heart, then I can bring that to parts of me that are hurting and to other people's parts that are hurting or pissed
It's
off or scared or
very
whatever.
it's very practical. And once I
Yeah.
learned IFS, my relationship with my partner really changed because now we don't have to argue of you did this and you did that. We're like, there's a part of me that's upset that thinks that way. And
Yeah.
it's been really revolutionary. And yeah, exactly how in talk therapy you're kind of dependent on the therapist. You have to keep going. And in IFS you really get the tools. That's why I only work with people for 3 months, and then they get the tools and they can practice it. And once something maybe deeper comes up, they can come to a consultation, a session, but it's not really necessary to have the benefits. So,
Yeah.
because you were trained as a clinical psychotherapist, right? So I'm really curious, as you know, your own perspective, how you view clinical psychotherapy and who is it for
Yeah.
versus IFS, and yeah, what's your take on that?
It's a really good question. I'll give you um, a core difference between traditional models of psychotherapy and IFS. So the way I was originally trained was in psychodynamic therapy, which is basically the idea that we have relational templates that are primarily that we inherit through our experiences with our primary caregivers, usually at early ages. So, for instance, I had a client years ago when I was just a student who, for 9 months, every single week, we worked on her fear of crying. The wound came from when she was a kid and she would cry and her dad would laugh at her and make fun of her, right? So, in the psychodynamic model, my goal is to effectively become her dad, to put it simply. Um, and through doing that, I am kind of hoping that her transference will play out with me. And eventually, maybe she will cry in front of me. And then instead of laughing at her and making fun of her, I provide what they call a corrective emotional experience. So she cries, and this did happen. She eventually cried, and she was able to look up at me. And I said, What do you notice? Am I laughing? Am I making fun of you? Am I making fun of you? Do I look like I'm about to hit you? And she said, No, I can tell you're not judging me. Right. And so I was warm and attuned. And ideally, she can internalize that experience and then externalize it into her life. Right. I was the attachment object, in that healing. Right. Which is pretty intense and very taxing for the therapist in a way, and also kind of communicates to the client, to your point, that they can't do it on their own, right? They need someone like me to like become your dad for 9 months, which is kind of weird. Um, in IFS, self is the attachment object. Self is the attachment figure. And so in the first, second, or third session with this client, if I were doing IFS, we could have her go inside and herself connect to that little girl that was getting made fun of with tears in her eyes. And self could go in, maybe recreate that scene, maybe confront dad about it or have dad step out and have self just be with the little girl as she cries and have self tell the little girl, it's okay. I hear you. Your tears make sense to me. Your tears are okay with me. Can I just be here with you while you cry? And the part of her experiences that corrective emotional experience. The corrective emotional experiencing, or really the witnessing, is part of the unburdening sequence of IFS. So she's already kind of started to unburden this part, right? And then the real life implications of work like this is she goes out and her system is less rooted in shame, right? This part of this exile that was holding that shame has been unburdened, has been taken out of that stuck frozen place from decades ago, has come into secure attachment with self and into attunement with self, and can be integrated, can be healed and integrated. And so then the client might be able to cry now and feel vulnerable and feel okay with it, and be more self-led.
And not just that, she can take that model and apply it to any other situation part that comes up.
Yeah.
And I always like to say to my clients, what IFS does, it basically trains you to be the sky and see all the parts like clouds. You don't have to be the cloud anymore. And that's why it goes hand in hand with meditation and, spirituality. And I know you talk a lot about that too, because for me, I was always like in between spirituality and then, science. And after university, I was really dimmed down on my spiritual side. And that's why I wasn't attracted to therapeutic models like, like Reiki. Like I know you're trained in Reiki, which is amazing. But I was like, yeah, but that's, wishy-washy. It's not really based on science. And when I found IFS, I was like, okay, this is finally a modality that's based on science. It's not shamanic work, even though it is a shamanic practice in a way, but it's much like it's evidence-based. And that part of me really needed that to get into IFS. But once I got in and I started going to sessions, I started training as a practitioner myself, I realized this is a pathway to connecting back to your spirituality. And now
That's right.
what I do with my clients is very spiritual, like a lot of spirituality is in the sessions. But at the same time, I know that there are IFS therapists who are trained in a model, and I've worked with a few of them, and they're very in the head, because I also did somatic IFS, and it's bringing the body, and I think bringing in the body creates the more of the connection. And I'm curious what your thought is, like when people even selecting their own IFS therapist, because definitely I in some forums of IFS I've seen some people sharing that they went to an IFS therapist and it was very much like talk therapy. They just talked about their part. They didn't do any of
Yeah.
the transformation really. So talking about the downsides, how IFS can be also misused, and then we can transition into the the spiritual aspect of it.
It's possible that IFS can look and feel very heady and very intellectual. A lot of times people are just kind of talking about their parts and they're saying, "Oh, I know I have this inner critic and he's always on my shoulder and I know he's there because of my dad. My dad was really hard on me and I know that like my inner critic's not right, so I just kind of need to learn to ignore him or just like tell him, "Hey, things are going to be fine. Get off my back." Right? Um, there's a lot of that can happen in IFS and is still IFS. You're still doing parts work, but what we're trying to do is enter into a relationship with that part. And we only enter into that relationship or into that dialogue when the client has a sufficient degree of self energy. Again, basically, love is the word I like to use for self energy. So if the client can cultivate enough love, compassion, curiosity for that part and go inside, right? So my show is called Going Inside, then they start this dialogue. It becomes a two-way street and they go inside and they close their eyes or not, or they feel the part in their body and they get really curious and they just ask, what are you trying to do for me? Right? Tell me more about this job of being critical and how you got this job and when it started. And what do you fear would happen if you didn't do this job for me? Well, I fear that you would fall apart and you would fall behind, you'd make less money, and then people would leave you and you'd be fundamentally alone and you'd be obliterated, basically. Oh, okay. Well, and that makes sense. You're really looking out for me in that way, even though the byproduct of it is I have all this anxiety, I have this somatic anxiety all the time, this tension, right? I'm grinding my teeth in my sleep, I've got headaches, whatever it might be, right? Or I have a drinking part that has to come in and neutralize the whole system every night because I'm so exhausted from this critical part and trying to please everyone during the day. So my drinking part comes online at 9 or 10 p.m. and drinks until I fall asleep or whatever it is. Um, kind of forgot the question, but I could probably find it.
No, it was about the in the head process, how also
Yeah.
IFS, like you can have IFS. That's why that's the thing that I really love about IFS is that you can really make it malleable. You can make it very
Yeah.
somatic, you can make it very heady, you can make it very spiritual, you can make it very analytical. And yeah, that why my question was how to, like, what's the like, what do you see the blind spots of some IFS therapists? Just
Yeah.
so people listening would know if their IFS therapist, you know, will get them where they need to, will get them inside basically, and not just like in the head. And yeah,
Well, if we're in this figuring it out mode, which a lot of therapies are insight oriented, meaning like knowledge based, like developing some insight or some clever insight of like, again, my inner critic who looks and sounds like my dad is basically there because my dad was hard on me. It's like, okay, great. That might be true. It's actually the case for my life and my inner critic, but no healing has really happened in that. Not to mention parts, just like people, parts are these subpersonalities. They don't really like to be reduced or figured out, right? So if I go in just trying to figure out my critical part,
not
it
from
it
self
tends to
energy. Yeah,
close off. Yeah. Yeah, from another part, right? A figuring out part. Or you could say, that therapists' manager parts are coming in and it's kind of a manager on manager part, you know, a manager part trying to figure out the client's manager parts, right? In this very heady intellectual way. So IFS, I think, in its purest form, is highly relational. And it's about, again, repairing these attachments between self and part. That's really where the magic happens. The two major components of that process are unblending and unburdening, right? Unblending to get a little space between me and this critical part, asking it for space, asking it for just enough space so I can get to know it more and hear its story. And if I can do that from a place of self, we might eventually work toward an unburdening, which to your point I think is a shamanic practice. The first time I used it, I just thought, oh, this is modern day shamanism packaged into, a psychotherapy model, which Dick has done an amazing job putting it into a model that will be accepted by the psychologists of the world, the scientists, the medical model, especially that I operate in the U.S., and in North America. So, but in reality, it's like Bob Falconer, who I've had on the show, calls it the Trojan horse. It's basically ushering in some shamanism through a psychological model that people can get behind.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so I think one of the things to point out is the cognitive bypassing, because there's the spiritual bypassing where you're just like, oh, everything's love and light, I don't have any shadows, life is beautiful. And then there's the cognitive bypassing, in which I unknowingly lived for so many years, because I started reading, psychology books since I was 12, 13. That was all I was reading. So I kind of thought I got everything figured out. I know all my family dysfunctions, how it affected me, why I am the way I am. And I knew everything, but the healing wasn't happening. I was running my life from the manager parts, from control parts, and it was really exhausting. So yeah, definitely the cognitive bypassing is something to be aware of, especially with clients who have very strong that analytical part of figuring it out. In sessions, I find that I have to constantly see whether their manager part stepped in. And after a session or two, they figure out like, oh, okay, so when that happens, it's my another part stepping in. They start differentiating and noting when another part comes in, especially in the beginning with people who have a lot of protectors. Do you find that too, that people after a while start noticing?
Well, one of the most critical skills of IFS is learning the felt difference between being in a part and being in self, or being more in a part and more in self. There's some degree, right? We're never 100% in self. We're in some degree of self, and we're always a little blended with some parts, right? Like I have a part that helped me be on time more or less for this interview today, and was worried this morning I might forget it or find the Zoom link or get the time wrong, right? And that part is helping me to show up and do this interview, right? So I want to bring that part along. Now, if I'm always blended with that part and always worried or excessively worried about what could go wrong, right? Then that's kind of a different story, and we might need a little more unblending there. Um, you mentioned somatic work earlier. I'm a big fan of weaving in, somatic work into IFS. A lot of people, myself included, feel their parts very somatically. So an exercise would be like if you and the listeners right now were to imagine all of a sudden you're halfway through your day and you look down at your phone and someone important in your life sends you a message that says, hey, we need to talk. And you could just see how that registers with your body, right? Like I have a little tightening even in the pit of my stomach
Yeah,
of
I feel the
this is
whole
probably going to be
body.
something bad.
Yeah, yeah.
And parts of me want to get ready for that. What happened? What did I do wrong? Am I in trouble? Right? I'm like feeling 12 again, like I'm going to the principal's office. It happens like that, right? So I could know before I go into that conversation or call that person on the phone, how much am I in a part? How much am I in self, right? And so a part can feel tense. It can feel like hunching over. It can feel small. It can feel like I'm getting ready to fight, right? It can feel like I'm going in ready to defend. If you're being defensive, quote unquote, right? This is a Freudian term. Who or what are you defending, right? Well, I have a protector part that's going to go in and protect my exiles that hold the shame, right? And come in and go, hey, so you wanted to talk? What's going on? What did I do? And they say, well, you were going to send me the thing you forgot. And I say, well, and I'm defensive, right? I'm in a part. On the other hand, if I'm in self or more in self, somatically, it often feels more expansive, more open. It feels more calm in my body. I can stay more open to the possibilities of what this phone call might be about, right? And I can call and go, hey, so and so, what's going on? And the feedback might be the same. It might be like, dude, I thought you were going to send me the thing or whatever. And I can go, you're totally right. I forgot. Let me get that to you. How else can I make this right? So that difference can be that response can feel and be very different in being a little more self-led to the same stimulus.
Yeah, I love that you pointed that out, that actually it's training to understand what it's like to be in the self and in the part. And then I can, like, even I went to a dance class, and then we had to dance in front of a mirror, and we were filming ourselves. And I was killing the dance moves all the class, and then when the phone came up, the video, I started messing up everything. And then we're like, okay, let's do a second round, because I messed up the whole sequence. And then I just stepped aside just for like 10 seconds, and I'm like, that part that's afraid to be seen, that's afraid to be judged. I'm like, can you just, they're like in therapy sessions, can you ease up? Like, I'm here with you. Don't worry, I'm gonna stand here for you. And I didn't mess up anything, because I really needed that part to step aside, and we can use that through, like, in conversation with our loved ones, in work environments, everywhere. I love that. Yeah, so integrating the whole somatics, that's very important. And understanding how self energy feels in our body. I love that you're mentioning that it's love, heart chakra, and how seeing how all religions kind of lead to the same conclusion, living from the heart. And I love that you're also saying that curiosity and compassion are the two qualities that can be like the doorway to self energy. And for me, I think curiosity is the thing, because sometimes compassion is a bit harder to tune into. What do you say?
Yeah. Well, for years, the first decade of my career as a therapist, um, this idea of self-compassion got passed around a lot. And so if you have a client come in and sit on your couch, and they're here because they absolutely hate themselves, right? I hate everything about me. I'm a failure. I lost my job. I just went through a divorce, right? Maybe my kids don't want to spend time with me. And then the therapist goes, well, I think just practicing a little self-compassion would be good. And then really they're speaking to a part, and a part of the client goes, how in the heck could I ever, or why would I be compassionate when I screwed up? I'm the reason I lost my job, right? I'm the reason my marriage fell apart because I drink too much. And then I yelled at my kids, so now they don't want to talk to me, right? All those things might be true. And it's not my job to save the client from those truths if that's how they got here. But going from I hate myself to you should love yourself is too big of a leap for most people. It actually triggers their protector parts, right? Really, it triggers their exiles, because you're kind of like trying to force feed it opposite information, right? Um, they're coming in and saying like, I'm completely unlovable. And therapist is going, you're very lovable. Let's find the ways in which you're lovable, right? But they're so blended, and they're so blended with so many parts, right? And over identifying with so many parts that this idea of just self-compassion is like, I don't want to endorse my bad behaviors, right? I don't want to endorse my drinking. I don't want to endorse my XYZ. So what IFS offers just in its stance is so de-shaming and destigmatizing of just going, okay, so there's a part of you that had yelled at someone at work or was difficult with your manager. There's a part of you that drinks. There's a part of you that yells at your kids, right? Can can you just imagine if all those were parts, or like people that are kind of working really hard inside you and they all have good intent? Can you imagine just you sitting around a table or a campfire with all of them and just getting to know one of them a little bit today? And then the process can really take off, and they can see and get a little de-shaming in their system to get a little distance from a part and start to get to know it, and then the work can take off. So then it's like it's less about self-compassion and it's more about compassion from self to a part, and you're kind of becoming the parent you never had, right? By going in and being there for the different parts of you in the way they needed someone to be at that time. That was probably when you were 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever.
Amen to what you said here. And, I was into the whole reparenting myself, because I had a very destructive childhood. I didn't really have parents. And I was always like, okay, I need to reparent myself. I need to be my own parent. And I was talking about it to my clients as well, for the past 6 years, always, like giving them all kinds of tasks to do, like journaling exercises of, finding self compassion, reparenting yourself. But I didn't really understand what it means until I found IFS. And
Right.
the biggest
Right.
de-shaming aspect of IFS is that it's not you who wants to kill yourself or is drinking, it's a part of you. And that differentiation is, I think it's a game changer, because
Yeah.
Otherwise, people can't really meet with that part. It's too painful.
Yeah. Yep. Something that happens in my work as a trauma therapist, pretty much exclusively what I do in therapy is working with folks with trauma and especially complex trauma, severe child abuse, things of that nature. And so for a lot of folks, they don't have a good parenting example. And so when we go inside, and for instance, and if we encounter an exile, this 6 year old boy who's beaten and bruised and been locked in the basement, and the client's self walks in the door, sometimes we have this moment, and I'll ask the client, do you get a sense for what this little boy in the corner needs? And the client is going, I have no idea. And I'm a little freaked out. And I think maybe he needs space. Maybe I should leave. I'm not sure. Right. And sometimes the therapist might need to lend a hand here and offer some options. Right. Because even if I ask the client, what do you imagine if in your real life you encountered a little boy like this who had been beaten and abused? What would you do? Right, to help him or to demonstrate I'm here for you and help is on the way or whatever it might be. And sometimes clients really draw a blank, right? I would even use the example sometimes of like when you see someone being a really good parent, like in a movie, could you mimic that? Right? Well, I saw this movie and so maybe I could offer the kid like a blanket or like some juice, like do kids like juice? Like, I don't know, try it. See if you can offer a little boy a blanket and some juice and I might say, I know kids like stuffed animals, right? Like a 6 year old might like a really cool stuffed animal. You could try that and just see how it goes. So sometimes we have to help in that regard too, because clients are drawing a blank on examples of good parenting, right? And they have 100 examples of parenting that missed the mark, or absentee parenting, or a parent that was drunk, or a parent that was explosive, or both. And so sometimes we have to really help give clients a leg up in that way, because for a lot of us, our experiences of receiving good, solid, good enough parenting are pretty limited.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I agree with that. And that's why as much as I love IFS for self practice, I still, I've not seen a client of mine go as deep as we can one on one. And myself and my other, therapeutic supervisors, I still go to therapy regularly because I know I have all the tools. But to really sit for that hour and a half or, hour and 15 minutes with those parts, it's
Yeah.
difficult. We want to, I want to find distractions, and I don't really like. Now I don't find that I need guidance from my therapist, but I just need someone to hold space. Like I'm here in front of my laptop, and just now is the time to meet with my parts. Because when I do it by myself, yeah, I meet with those parts, but it's more like a daily check-in. I don't do that deep work of really that digging and release. Do you find that too, or you have your ways of?
I do. I find that the work we can do with our parts is often limited. It's the same for me. I can only go so far with my parts. It just goes a lot further and deeper and is safer when I'm with my IFS therapist. And an example would be again, let's say you're going in and being with this exile, it's enough and it requires a lot of energy and focus to just be with the 6 year old boy, right? And other parts might be getting activated because you're being with him for the first time. So sometimes that therapist is, yeah, number one, holding space, or in other words, they are kind of sharing in their self energy with the client, and the client can feel that, and the client's parts can feel that. They can feel 10, 20, 30, 50% safer with the therapist's self energy being there. And also, it's hard to both focus on being with this little boy and also conceptualize what do we do next here, right? So then the therapist just offering suggestions or just options of like the juice or the blanket or this basement. It looks and feels really cold down there. And you mentioned there's no windows. Can you ask the little boy, does he want to go somewhere else, like outside, or does he have a place in mind, like a playground, right? Or like a special room that you can make together, or better yet, does he actually want to come with you into the present? Well, I don't know. Let me ask him. He says yes. Okay, he says yes. So go ahead and, right, if there's no objections from other parts, or check in with other parts, see if they have objections. And if not, bring him in to the present, right? Maybe even bring him into that room you're in, that comfy couch behind you, or whatever it is. And so it really helps. Yeah, and you can also do quite a bit of work on your own. It also just depends on your history, right? So for folks with trauma, especially with childhood trauma and severe complex trauma, it just means your parts are often more polarized. There's more polarization in the system, parts that hold really strong perspectives or a lot of fears, or the potential for what they call protector backlash. Like if we move too fast and rip that boy out of the basement, and a protector part comes in and goes, wait, what the heck are you guys doing? So it also depends on your background, your history, as to how far you can go with your own IFS solo.
I love that you brought up polarizations because I think it's quite a new term for most people, but it's causing most of the issues. And when I explain what a polarization is to my clients, they're like, oh, I have that. So maybe you can explain how you understand polarizations.
Well, we all have them, right? So using that example of this imaginary client, for instance, who says, "I hate myself," right? Um, let's say that he has uh, actually, I'll give you another example. This is one I like to use. So I had a client who was when she was like I don't know, 10 or 11, she was playing a piano recital in front of the whole school, and she missed a few notes. And on the drive home in the minivan, her mom just didn't talk to her, and she got a sense that her mom knew she missed a few notes and was quite unhappy with the girl, right? And so a part of her came online and took on this burden of, if I miss a note or two, people don't love me. People withdraw love, right? So that logic got baked in that moment, and that part took on that burden. So in order to protect against that happening again, a part of her, maybe the same part or another part, comes online, this perfectionist or critical part, and says, in order to not lose love, I'm going to be as perfect as possible for the rest of my life. And so she practices, for 4 hours a day. She gets even better grades than ever before. And then 15 years later, she's this overachieving person working in Silicon Valley, where my practice is, who is getting so burnt out now because of these parts that are driving and that burn so bright around making sure she's perfect at all costs, right? So and today, let's say she comes into my office, and one part is this polarized protector part that says I have to be perfect, right? And so after being perfect for 9 or 10 or 11 hours at work every single day, she comes home, and then at the end of the day, she gets an email that has a little bit of critical feedback in it, or suggests that maybe she's imperfect, or that she missed the mark, or needs to do better on this project next time. And so you have the protector part that says, okay, I need to be even more perfect. And then maybe she has what IFS calls the firefighter part that says, hey, shame just got triggered, so I need to put that fire out. And so she gets that email and then has 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 or 8 drinks, right, to douse the flame of shame, right, or protect that part that holds shame. So then you have a polarization between a firefighter and a manager, right? This manager that's proactively trying to get ahead of the shame, right? And then a firefighter who is putting out, reactively putting out the fire once it's been lit, right? Or potentially lit. And so these two parts disagree about how things should be done. They both have the same goal of trying to protect the system and preserve her system and make sure she is good and has a good life and does well at work and all these things. But they fundamentally disagree about how it should be done. And neither of them are really aware of self, right? So it's one or the other who's at the wheel, right? And very much being led by a part for most of her life.
And once you get them at the table talking to each other, it can be very beautiful. Even today, I had an amazing session with a client, which one part really wanted to self express and be authentic. And another part was the people pleaser, the little girl that learned that she will get love once she pleases everyone. And yeah, putting them in front of each other, they can understand that they have still the same goal to be loved, to be accepted, and to be themselves, and to find that resolution. Or with overeating, one part is like strict diet mentality, and another part is like, screw this, I'm gonna eat whatever I want freedom. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. And then talking about protector backlash. I think it's also very important to talk, because people think that, I had some clients of mine who came to the session and they have so many protectors and they're like, I want to get to this sphere, to this part that's, holding this. I know this part is there. Take me there. And I'm like, okay, let's work on this, And we have to get the agreement from the protectors. But the protectors were so strong, they didn't allow to get to the vulnerable part. And the client was like, why didn't we get to the part that I wanted to get to? Like, what's happening? And I had to explain the protector backlash, because when I did go straight there, we had some consequences. So can you explain so that people would know? Yeah.
Well, I just think of it this way, like if these parts are people that are part of a team and I just bulldoze my way in to this team and someone like this perfectionist part who never misses a note has been doing its job for 20 years and I just blow past that part and go straight to that little girl who missed a few notes on the piano, um, I don't blame that part for getting pissed off, right? What the heck are you doing here, right? I've been doing my job for 20 years. And also, if you're coming in and taking away my job, what am I going to do? So parts fear becoming useless or irrelevant, right? So we have to respect and honor and tread really lightly and go extra slow in all of this work to keep it safe. Go slower than you think you need to go. Um, or else, if you bypass that protector and go in and rescue that little girl, or a self-like part rescues that little girl, or a therapist self-like part has an agenda about rescuing that little girl, and you bypass the protector, then it's possible that the next week the client comes back and goes, okay, yeah, we did that unburdening thing last week, and like that was really helpful. But also, for whatever reason, like my anxiety has just been through the roof, and I'm like so freaked out about missing a detail or screwing up, and like that perfectionist part is like stronger than ever, and there's almost like that part is mad at me. So I'm like, what do we do? So there you might get some proof that you've bypassed a protector. On the other hand, and this is where the work can get really dangerous if you have firefighters that drink or eat or cut or are suicidal or whatever, is you bypass those parts and they show you that you've bypassed them by drinking or using or cutting or whatever it might be. And so you just have to be so careful, and you have to trust that this system has been this way for a lot longer than you've known it as a therapist or a practitioner. And these parts have been doing their jobs way longer, right, than you realize. And you have to tread lightly, and it's all about permission, right? Even asking the protector permission just to get to know or say hi to that little girl at the
Yeah,
piano.
so respective. Yeah, a lot of respect. Absolutely love that.
Respect.
And that's why it sometimes it's scary to see other types of therapies. I just got trained in theta healing, and just for my own connection to the divine and seeing what other models I could use helpful with my clients. And I don't really like I like some aspects of it, especially for my own use. But what they do in their process of digging, they go straight to the exile. They bypass all of those parts, and I'm wondering how is that affecting, the protector bypass, like lashing out.
Well, so another model I'm trained in is EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which basically says the effects of trauma are felt because memories are impartially processed. When the trauma is happening, memory consolidation stops. And that's part of why people experience the effects of trauma and have flashbacks and are reliving it, and their nervous systems are keyed up, and then they have to drink to tamp down the nervous system or whatever. And so in EMDR, you could say that the EMDR is really being done on the exile, right? We're really going in and finding that part that holds the pain, the part that was abused. And so in EMDR, for an EMDR therapist, the path is to go in and find the one that was abused, and as soon as you're ready, start digging up those memories and having that part relive them while stimulating both sides of the brain, right? So it could be moving the eyes, it could be tapping, whatever. And I find that in a lot of cases, and using EMDR, we can unintentionally bypass protectors. And then we usually find out after the fact that we've done that when clients decompensate and they get worse and they feel more flooded or dissociated or they're drinking more or whatever. So there's a lot of ways in which we can bypass protectors unintentionally, when we're trying to help.
Yeah, makes sense. And I'm curious, what do you say to those clients who are new to IFS and they come to you and you're like, look, I have this anxiety. How many sessions do I need to get rid of it? Um, what do you say?
That sounds like a lot of my clients, especially working in the US in a culture that idolizes productivity and results and data. Better yet, living, working in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, where technology is driven by all these values. And so clients absolutely come in with those types of values and agendas. And the first thing I would do is just validate and like see the good in that, right? So I totally hear there's a part of you that really wants to know how long is this going to take, right? There's a part of you that really wants assurance from me or a guarantee from me that this is going to work. I totally hear that, right? Um, could we get to know any fears around that of like if this took too long or if this didn't work? Or would you be willing to get to know the part of you that fears that this therapy might not work for me? And then I have to go back to the drawing board and I have to start Googling other types of therapy again, or maybe try that EMDR thing or brain spotting or whatever it is, right? It's scrambling, right? So I conceptualize that I'm talking to a manager, right? Managers are the parts that bring people to therapy, right? The parts that go, I've had enough. This drinking is enough. This cutting is enough. This restricting my eating is enough. That's it. We're going to therapy. We're going to call this John guy and see what this is all about. And then they show up. That manager, shows up in the first session. And so I just get to know it. I validate it. I really try to do basically indirect direct access or implicit direct access by validating that part. So that part is kind of checking me out and wondering if I'm going to validate its fears and just like, and it makes a lot of sense that there's a part of you really wanting to get all the information possible. There's a part of you that really wants to know, is this going to work or be a waste of time? Right? That totally makes sense to me. Yeah, maybe you can even think that part that's trying to help you do your research here, make sure this is a good thing. That makes sense to me. So the key is just to see it all as good, right? And that parts aren't bad. There, for some reason, there's still a lot of like ethos around parts being bad, or like, oh, you're in a part, or you're like, it's bad to be in a part, and that's not the case at all. So I just really honor that, yeah, some part of you got fed up and brought you to therapy and picked up the phone and said, enough is enough. And that same part is wanting to know, can you guarantee me results or how long is this going to take? So I don't take the bait by answering it and say, well, maybe 6 sessions, can you do 6 sessions? Or, yeah, this is going to work and research says it's going to work. So I don't do that dance with them, right? I don't take the bait, but I just honor that those fears are coming up. The last thing I would say is I would ask that part to, if it's willing to suspend disbelief for a few sessions, right? Or suspend or delay wanting to conclude for a few sessions. There's a part that really wants to know, is this going to work for me at all? I totally get that. Can you maybe ask that part if it's willing to check in with us in 2 or 3 sessions about that? And that
I
part can
love
let
that.
us know how it thinks this is going.
That's a brilliant answer. I'm gonna use that with my own clients. I mean, I kind of do similarly, but yeah, I love the way you framed it. So now going into because I know we have limited time, I would love to talk
Yeah.
much longer, but like going into the spirituality aspect of it, and especially you living in Silicon Valley, working with all these tech people, how do you find with clients who are, rational, how do you intervene the
Yeah.
spiritual aspect, or yeah, what's your take on this? And do you see evolution in clients working with IFS, that they're getting more connected?
I do. It's a great question. So I think IFS is a psycho-spiritual model. I think this idea of connecting to our heart energy or our soul, right, or our chi is a spiritual experience, right? Um, Expanding our definitions of self energy, whatever you believe that to be. If your idea of self energy is the God image of you or like your relationship with Jesus, then that's what we use and that's what we start with, right? It's another way of accessing love or like your version of love. So I just work with whatever's there. But number one, I think as a society, we're in a spiritual crisis of sorts, and we're in a very lost place. And so even my most intellectual clients or clients with the strongest intellectual parts are sometimes very relieved to when I sprinkle in a little spirituality, right? And just invite them into that. Um, so I think it starts with talking about our definitions of self energy and like what is the self and what is the soul and like what if you actually were just like made of love at your core and we can tap into that well, that infinite well of love and bring it to that little boy in the basement or that really pissed off protector, that perfectionist part on your shoulder. What if that was the case? Even feeling somatically or energetically, you mentioned Reiki, like if you can feel or cultivate love or Reiki, chi in your body, that's a spiritual experience. As you mentioned, the unburdening is a spiritual experience. I think it's a shamanic process that directly mimics other shamanic protocols that I've seen and even experienced myself as a client on the Reiki table. Um, and then from IFS, and this might be another episode, is you have IFS as one circle, and then you have many circles around it where a lot of IFS people or the Bob Falconers of the world, um, the deeper you go into someone's system, and if you do this work long enough, and if you're open to it as a practitioner, you very well may encounter um, things that are not native to the system, like what Bob would call an unattached burden or an entity, right? Or an energy that is not native to your system. On the other hand, you can also encounter benevolent entities or spirit guides. You can even ask a client, especially if they're really in the thick of it, the work is really stuck, right? They're in a really dark place. I know this sounds kind of weird, but now that while you're in this really stuck place, could you just ask for a spirit guide to appear or a guide or an energy that's equipped to help with situations like this? Could you just ask and see if anyone or anything shows up? And sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it does. Sometimes some sort of help comes right away, and then all of a sudden, this this outer circle, of spirituality in IFS is often running, and it's part of the experience. So, in many cultures, and as Bob Falconer will talk about, they see trauma as a spiritual experience, and therefore trauma healing has to be a spiritual and energetic experience, right? Hospitals in Brazil where they treat trauma and PTSD, they also have shamans and energy workers, right? Because it's like, why would you not? These practices that are thousands of years old and therapy and psychology is like, a couple hundred years old or whatever it is, not even that. So I think we just have to have a lot of reverence for what we don't know and a lot of curiosity and encouraging clients to open their system to their own experience of spirituality, whatever that might be. And then as therapists, we use that and leverage that if that comes. And then, of course, as a practitioner, you might be working with your own spirit guides and your own energy. And there's a lot you can do there just to help your clients by being as spiritually and as energetically bolstered as you can.
Yes, absolutely yes. And that's why I went into Theta healing because that's all about working with your spirit guides, with your higher self, with the divine. And I really see even my clients from corporate who are not very into spirituality, when I just started, okay, are you, encountering some difficult situation, just are you open to, trying this or that? And to my own surprise, they're very open to it.
Yeah,
Though I do encounter some parts, like skeptical parts in them, which we have to
of
work with as
course.
well. But like the unburdening, the whole process is so much more like more impactful. And I give homework to my clients of doing meditation or some other form of cultivating that inner awareness, and I find that sessions go so much more smoother. What would you recommend for people for strengthening their own self energy? As we're finishing off the podcast.
For the sake of just answering it as succinctly as possible, um, go outside and take your shoes off and put your feet on the ground or the earth or the sand or the whatever, or put them in water. Or if you can, put your whole self in water. Take a swim in like a river or the ocean or whatever it might be. Or just go hang out outside around a bunch of trees and slow yourself down See if you can open yourself to the experience of being in the trees. See how that registers somatically for you. See if you can imagine gathering energy or chi from that forest. And as you return back to your life or your apartment or your computer or whatever, see if you can channel some of that into your life or your work day or your finance job or whatever it might be or your clinical work. Um, there's a million ways to kind of go and get it. It's about finding what works for you.
I was thinking you're gonna say that because every person has a different way of doing it. Some people,
Yeah.
for some people, it's music or arts, and some people it's nature.
Sure.
Some people it's
Yeah,
actually even
flow
church.
states. Yeah.
Um, okay, and what about you? I'm so curious because you talked about your own, 20 plus years of healing and then finding IFS and working with clients. Um,
Yeah.
Maybe like what was your like deepest thing that you healed that you were working on, and what was the breakthrough moment, if it
Well,
was?
sure. The biggest one for me was healing some childhood trauma through my IFS work and going through some unburdening some parts that were really, really stuck and frozen and deep in there. Um, that was profound. It was almost like a psychedelic experience. That opened up my system a lot, and a lot of my protectors just naturally softened and stopped working so hard and learning to trust me a little bit more. So for me, it had to do with childhood and going back and doing that work. And as the more I did it, the more I found parts were holding memories that I didn't even know about or fully remember until they reminded me of them. And so, in a way, the deeper we got, the worse things got. But then we hung in there well enough, and my therapist was skilled enough to help shepherd me through the full experience and integrating some of what we have done. So you never know what you're going to find when you go inside, and the deeper you go inside. But what I would say to listeners as like a final note is just it's worth it.
I think that's what is actually scary about therapy because going inside,
Yeah.
it is like from me, it was a real dark night of the soul where I was like, I either gonna get out of this or I'm gonna just like die. Um, so to for someone who's listening and who knows that there is something inside, but they're afraid of this darkness, what would you say?
Well, if you're in fear, you're in a part, right? So again, it goes back to how do you find self? How do you cultivate a little self, a little curiosity? And it might be, especially if you have a trauma history, that finding a good IFS therapist or practitioner is the way to keep the work safe and to get it going and build some of these core skills. And at some point, you might do more of the work on your own, but finding a good, solid practitioner that you really resonate with is usually like the place to start. Yeah.
I love that you said resonating because some people push themselves from their parts of, okay, I found this therapist, I need to work with him. But no, you have to really find someone who resonates with you, even though there are so many therapists. But it doesn't mean that they're trained in the same modality. It means like what's the most important is the personal connection. Like if do I feel safe with you? Do I feel that I can open up and I can talk, whatever it is. Okay, there were so many other questions I wanted to ask you, but I think we're gonna finish off. I will respect your time.
Yeah.
And one last question that I always ask all my guests is, what is vitality for you?
I think vitality is feeling excited about your life, excited and engaged in your life. And for me, this, of course, has a lot to do with my work. I'm lucky that my work is also my source of meaning and a source of creativity for me and richness. If that's not the case for you, whoever's listening, I would encourage you to try to make it so that most hours of your day are spent doing what you actually love and your God-given talents and gifts are best utilized. When you feel that your gifts are being utilized in the world, you have plenty of purpose and plenty of motivation to keep going. If you don't, life can feel really dissonant and draining. So I would encourage people just take the bold step of really stepping into who you are and what you know you're really good at and own that and be proud of that and be confident. Confidence is one of the 8 C's of self. And so practice owning that. And I think your life will change and feel more vital if you do.
Yeah, because we spend so much time at work, And if it's draining, how can we have vitality in our body? That makes so much sense, following our divine plan. Thank you so much, John, for coming
Thank you for
over.
having
And
me.
I will put all of your information in the show notes so people can find you and work with you. Thank you so much again, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
You too. Thanks again. Keep in touch.